Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast. It's really great to have you with us today.
Glad to be here.
So today we are doing something a little different, something that really leans into the core of what we talk about here on the network. We are taking a deep dive into a topic that, frankly, most of us try to completely avoid thinking about until we absolutely have to.
Right, yeah. No one wants to think about it.
Exactly. But once we are actually in that moment, this specific thing, it becomes the center of our universe for about, 48 hours.
It is so true. It's one of those objects that just hides in plain sight. I mean, you see them on community bulletin boards, you see them in the break room at work, maybe tucked into a church newsletter, but you rarely stop to actually think about the mechanics of it.
Yeah, you really don't. And we are talking about the funeral flyer.
Mm-hmm.
And before you, the listener, before you tune out thinking, oh, okay, a piece of paper, how complex can this possibly be? Let me tell you, the source material we have today, it completely changed my perspective.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating.
The source is specifically called The Essential Guide to Funeral Flyers and Memorial Announcements.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to think of the funeral, the service, the eulogy, maybe the headstone as the main events, I guess, of memorial planning.
Which is a very, very common assumption. I mean, we tend to focus on the ritual itself, right? The gathering, the spoken words.
But the flyer, it always just felt administrative to me. It felt commercial, just like paperwork. But you, looking through this research, you had a very different take right off the bat.
I did, yeah. If you really analyze the function of this document, the funeral flyer isn't just paperwork. The source describes it as the first responder of funeral stationery.
The first responder. I love that phrase. Unpack that for me a little bit.
It really is. I mean, think about the timeline of loss. A death occurs, and there is this immediate, just overwhelming vacuum of information.
Pure chaos.
Chaos, really. People are confused, rumors start, the phone starts ringing off the hook, and the funeral flyer is the very first tangible point of contact between a grieving family and the wider community. It's the first thing that essentially says, this is what happened, and this is what we are doing about it.
That puts a huge amount of weight on a single sheet of paper.
It really is.
It is essentially the vanguard of the entire grieving process for the community.
It does. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how that sheet of paper holds up under that kind of weight. We want to understand why, in an age where we have Facebook, Instagram, digital obituaries, we still rely on a physical or at least a distinct digital flyer to announce a death.
Right, because we're going to unpack the design psychology behind them, which is honestly fascinating. Like, how do you design for dignity when you're basically in a panic?
Exactly.
We're going to look at the logistics, the sizes, the printing, and we're going to get into the whole DIY versus professional debate.
And perhaps most importantly, we are going to explore the hidden emotional function of the flyer, because the source makes a really compelling argument that the flyer actually reduces the emotional labor for the family.
That was the part that really, really clicked for me. So by the end of this hour, I promise you, you're going to look at that simple notice on the grocery store corkboard completely differently. You're going to see it as a highly sophisticated communication tool.
Absolutely. It is a masterclass in functional design under pressure.
So let's just start at the very beginning. We need to define our terms. Section 1 is the definition and the why. What exactly are we talking about here? Because the source material makes a pretty sharp distinction between a flyer and other things like brochures or booklets.
Right. And this is crucial because people often use the terms interchangeably, but they serve very different functions. The core definition here is that a funeral flyer is an informational memorial piece, and it's designed to communicate essential information quickly.
Quickly being the operative word there.
Yes, speed is the defining characteristic. Let's compare it to a brochure or a memorial booklet. Those are the things you get at the actual service.
Right, the things with the hymns and stuff.
Exactly. They have the order of service, maybe the lyrics to a hymn, the full obituary, maybe a collection of poems or a biography. You take those home, you put them in a keepsake box. You might read them a year later.
They are souvenirs of the service, essentially. They are meant for reflection.
Exactly. But the flyer is the announcement. It is not meant to be a deep read. It is meant to be seen, understood, and acted upon. The source material emphasizes that unlike brochures, flyers are transactional in nature.
Transactional?
Yeah, not in a cold way, but in a functional way.
So if the brochure is the novel, the flyer is the headline.
That is a perfect analogy. The flyer is the breaking news ticker. And this distinction really matters because of the speed factor.
Let's talk about that speed factor.
Yeah.
Because usually when we plan events like weddings or graduations,
Sure.
we have months. We agonize over fonts for weeks.
Exactly. A wedding invitation goes out 6 months in advance, but a funeral flyer. Families are often working with a timeline of days, sometimes even hours, between the passing and the service. You don't have time for a design committee. You don't have time for 3 rounds of proofs. You are operating in full crisis mode.
And strictly speaking, you can't really rely on the newspaper obituary anymore, can you?
Yeah.
I mean, fewer people read the physical paper, and online obituaries can sometimes be really hard to find if you don't know exactly where to look or which funeral home site to check.
Precisely. The newspaper obituary used to be the gold standard, but the cycle is just too slow, and the reach is too fragmented now. This is why the flyer is still the primary tool. It can be created and distributed within hours of the arrangements being finalized.
That's incredible turnaround time.
It is. And think about who it serves. It is crucial for notifying people who aren't constantly refreshing their social media feeds.
The source brought up the accessibility argument, which I thought was really touching. It's about not leaving people behind.
It is. We live in a bubble sometimes where we assume everyone is on the family WhatsApp group or checking Facebook constantly. But what about the deceased's former co-workers from 20 years ago? What about the neighbors down the street who are elderly and don't even own a smartphone?
Right. If you only post on Facebook, you are effectively uninviting a huge swath of the population that might have really cared about this person. You are creating a digital divide in Greece.
And there is something about the personal touch of print. The source notes that a printed flyer posted in a familiar place, like a church vestibule or a senior living facility bulletin board, it feels significantly more respectful to older community members than a digital link.
Yeah, I can see that.
It says, "We took the time to put this here for you."
It's physical evidence of the event. It anchors the reality of the loss in the physical world. But we aren't ignoring the digital age completely. The source talks about a hybrid model.
Yes, and this is where the flyer has really evolved. It hasn't disappeared at all, it's just adapted. Families now tend to design one master flyer. They print a certain amount for physical distribution for the church, the workplace, the neighborhood.
Right.
But then they take that same design, usually a PDF or a JPEG, and that becomes the attachment for the email blast. That becomes the image shared in the group chat.
So it serves double duty.
It does. It bridges the gap. It allows you to have that formal, dignified announcement in the digital space rather than just typing out a text message that says, "Funeral is at 2 p.m."
Which feels a little informal for something so heavy. Just a text bubble with a time and date feels almost like a barbecue invitation.
Exactly. Sending the image of the flyer via text adds a layer of formality and weight that plain text just doesn't have. It signals that this is a significant life event that requires a totally different level of attention.
So we know what it is. It's a fast, accessible, hybrid announcement tool.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about what actually goes on it. Section 2 of our deep dive is the art of restraint.
Well,
And I love this title because when you are grieving, I imagine the temptation is to just say everything,
oh, absolutely.
to put every poem, every accomplishment, every grandchild's name on there.
That is the instinct.
Mm-hmm.
You want to honor the person, so you want to fill every inch of white space with their life story. You feel like if you leave something out, you are somehow doing them a disservice. But the source material is very clear on this. For a flyer, that is a mistake.
Because of clarity.
Because of cognitive load, we have to remember the state of mind of the audience here. The people reading this flyer might also be grieving. They might be in shock. When people are in a state of emotional distress, their ability to process complex information drops significantly.
That is such a good point. You aren't reading it for pleasure. You are reading it for instruction. You are looking for a lifeline of information.
Correct. So clarity is paramount. The design psychology here focuses heavily on visual hierarchy. You have to guide the viewer's eye because their brain is likely scrambling.
So walk us through that hierarchy. What comes first?
Number 1, undeniably, is the name of the deceased. It needs to be the most prominent element on the page. You need to be able to see it from 5 feet away if it's on a bulletin board. It anchors the entire document. Then, the service details. But they need to be highly scannable. We are talking about the who, what, when, where. You shouldn't bury the time of the service in a paragraph of prose. It should be bulleted. It should be bold.
The source mentions the aesthetic generally being light. Why is that? Is that just tradition?
It is partially tradition, but it's largely legibility. Again, it comes back to accessibility. If you have a dark, heavy background with white text, that can be really hard to read, especially for older eyes, and especially if it's printed on a home printer where the ink might bleed a little bit.
Hmm.
Light backgrounds with dark text are universally the easiest to read.
And the photo. This seems like it would be the most emotional choice a family has to make.
It is. And the advice here is usually a single portrait, just one. And the goal is to capture the person's spirit. It doesn't need to be a formal studio headshot, sometimes a candid photo where the laughing is better, but just one.
Why only one?
Because if you put a collage of 20 photos on a flyer, you lose the impact. The viewer doesn't know where to look, it becomes cluttered.
The source used a phrase I really liked, visual calm.
Yes, this is a beautiful concept. The goal of the design isn't to be decorative for the sake of being pretty. It is to create a profound sense of visual calm.
What does that actually look like in practice?
It means using elements like floral borders, maybe faith symbols like a cross or a dove or soft gradients, but using them to frame the content, not to compete with it. It should feel steady. It should feel peaceful.
It shouldn't scream at you.
Exactly. It shouldn't look like a discount mattress ad with starbursts and exclamation points. It needs to have dignity. It needs to say, we have this under control, even if the family feels like they are completely falling apart. The flyer project's order.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the content. We talked about the name and the service details. But the source lists some specific must-haves regarding the dates and times.
Full name, definitely. Birth and death dates. This actually helps distinguish between people with similar names, which happens way more than you would think in tight-knit communities, and then the specific breakdown of the service. This is where it gets tricky and where the flyer is essential.
Because funerals are rarely just one single event anymore. It's not just show up at the church.
Right. You might have a visitation on Friday night, a private graveside service Saturday morning, and a public celebration of life on Saturday afternoon.
If you just put all that in a block of text, people will show up at the cemetery when they should be at the church.
Exactly. So the flyer needs to use headings or bullets to separate those events clearly. Visitation, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. New line. Service, 10 a.m. It needs to function like a very clear schedule.
What about the optional stuff? The source mentioned things like the officiant's name or gratitude.
Those are impactful if you have the space. Listing the officiant can be helpful for the community to know what kind of service it will be, whether religious or secular. A brief phrase like, in loving memory sets the tone. And instructions are very common now, like, in lieu of flowers, please donate to the hospice house.
Or dress codes. I've seen that more often lately. Please wear bright colors.
Yes, and putting that on the flyer is the most efficient way to ensure people actually do it. If you want a sea of yellow at the funeral, put it on the flyer. If you leave it to word of mouth, half the people will show up in black and feel incredibly awkward.
But again, the rule of thumb here is restraint.
Restraint. If it feels cluttered, cut it. It respects the reader's time, but it also respects the reader's emotional state. A cluttered design feels chaotic, and chaos is the absolute last thing you want to project at a funeral.
Okay, let's talk about the physical object itself, because size matters. Section 3 covers form factors. I usually just think of a standard piece of paper, but apparently there are options, and they aren't just arbitrary choices.
There are 3 main standards, and they each serve a totally different logistical purpose. It is really form-following function.
Start with the classic, the standard letter size.
8.5 by 11 inches. This is the workhorse. It's the most common for a reason.
Reduce?
Readability from a distance. If you are pinning this to the community board at the library or the break room at the factory, you need that size. You need the font to be large enough to catch someone's eye as they walk past.
That makes sense.
You are competing with other notices, cars for sale, lost cats. The letter size gives you the gravity you need.
It also gives you the most real estate for information without crowding everything together.
Correct. If you have that complex service schedule we talked about, visitation, funeral, reception, you almost have to go with the letter size just to fit it all in cleanly with enough white space to keep that visual calm.
But then we step down to the half page, 5.5 by 8.5.
This is literally a letter sheet cut in half. This format has become very popular for handouts and mail distribution.
Why mail?
It fits perfectly in a standard greeting card envelope, an A9 envelope usually, without folding it 3 times. It feels a bit more like an invitation and less like a formal notice.
I see. It's a bit more intimate.
It is. It's easier to carry, too. If you are handing these out at a door, a half page slides into a purse or a Bible much easier than a full sheet. It's cost-effective to print since you get 2 per sheet, but it's still big enough for a decent photo.
And then there's the smallest one, the quarter page.
The 4.2 5 by 5.5. This is essentially a postcard size.
That seems tiny for a funeral, doesn't it?
It is compact. It's rarely the primary announcement. It's used mostly for quick handouts or inserts. Say you are handing out a program at the church, but you need to give people directions to the reception hall, or perhaps a link to an online memorial guest book. You might slip a quarter-page flyer inside the program.
Ah, okay, so it's efficient. It's supplemental.
Very efficient. It's discreet. But the challenge there is design. You have almost no room for error. You really can only fit the name, the photo, and the absolute basics. You have to be ruthless with your editing. If you try to put a poem on a quarter page, it just becomes unreadable.
So you choose the size based on how you plan to distribute it. If it's going on a wall, go big. If it's going in the mail, go medium. If it's an insert, go small.
Precisely. It is a logistical decision just as much as an aesthetic one.
Let's move to Section 4, Production. This is the DIY versus done-for-you decision matrix. And this feels like a really high-stakes decision for a family. We were talking about, territory where the rubber really meets the road on planning.
It is. And there are valid reasons for both paths. It often comes down to budget versus time versus stress tolerance.
Let's start with the DIY route. Why would a grieving family want to take on the burden of designing a flyer themselves?
Speed and control. Those are the two main drivers. If the service is in 2 days, you might not want to wait for a print shop to open or a designer to email you back. If you do it yourself, you can start at 10 p.m. and be done by 11 p.m. You aren't beholden to anyone else's schedule.
And the control aspect.
Imagine the details change. Suddenly the reception venue falls through and you have to move it. If you are doing DIY, you just open the file, type in the new address, and hit print. You can respond instantly.
That flexibility is huge.
It is. Also, some families find it therapeutic. It's something to actually do with your hands. It's a way to serve the loved one, saying to yourself, I will make this beautiful for them. It transforms the grief into a small, creative act.
But there is a warning here, a big flashing red light in the source material.
A big warning. Attention to detail. When you are grieving, your brain is foggy. It is very, very easy to type 2023 instead of 2024. It is easy to misspell cemetery. It is easy to get the day of the week wrong.
Oh, that would be a nightmare. Imagine realizing that after you've already handed them out.
And if you print 500 copies with the wrong date, that causes significant distress. It feels like a massive failure. So if you go DIY, you need a second pair of eyes, someone who isn't quite as close to the grief to proofread it. You need a designated editor.
So what's the alternative? The done-for-you service.
This is for families who want professional polish without the stress. They want to completely hand off the burden. They provide the text and the photo, and a professional designer handles the formatting, the lighting correction on the photo, the font selection.
It removes the variable of, is this going to look bad?
Right. And for many, the visual presentation reflects directly on the memory of the deceased. They want it to be perfect. They don't want a homemade look. They want it to look official and honored.
The source material specifically mentions a resource here, the funeral program site.
Yes, they are highlighted because they offer a really good middle ground. They offer DIY templates, so you get the professional design structure, but you fill in the blanks yourself. And they also offer full design services.
That seems like a very smart model. You aren't starting from a blank Word document.
Exactly. Staring at a blank white screen is intimidating on a good day. Starting with a template that already has the floral border and the text boxes in the right place, that's manageable. It ensures balance during an emotionally demanding time. It gives you a much-needed head start.
Moving on to Section 5, materiality and logistics. We're getting physical here. Paper and finish, does it really matter? Or are we just being fussy?
It matters way more than you'd think. Again, think about the environment and the tactile experience.
Okay, standard paper versus heavier paper.
Standard paper, like your everyday copy paper, is fine for mass distribution. If you are printing 200 of them to hand out at a large gathering, standard is very cost-effective. But if you are posting this on a bulletin board where it might hang for 2 weeks,
It's going to curl.
it's going to curl, it might tear, humidity might get to it. Heavier paper, like cardstock or a heavy bond, commands more respect. It stays flat, it looks pristine much longer.
It feels more permanent.
It signals importance. When you pick up a piece of heavy cardstock, your brain subconsciously says, this is quality, this matters. It feels substantial in the hand, which aligns with the substantial nature of the loss.
What about the finish? Matte or glossy? I feel like photos usually mean glossy.
In this context, matte is almost always preferred.
Why is that? I would have thought glossy would make the photo pop.
Glare. Think about where these are read. Church halls with overhead fluorescent lighting. Community centers with bright windows. Glossy paper reflects light, making text incredibly hard to read at certain angles.
Mhm.
You don't want people tilting the paper back and forth just to read the address. Matte absorbs light. It ensures the text is legible from any angle.
That is such a specific, practical detail that I never would have thought of.
It also feels softer. Glossy can feel very commercial, like a takeout menu or a club promoter's flyer. Matte feels more like traditional stationery. It has a warmer, more somber tone. It fits the occasion much better.
And we touched on this earlier, but quantity planning is part of the logistics too.
The hybrid approach we mentioned saves a lot of money here. You don't need to print 500 copies anymore. You might print 50 for the church and the immediate family, and then rely on the digital version for everyone else.
It's more efficient.
It is. And it's eco-friendly, which matters to a lot of families. It stops you from having a box of 300 unused flyers sitting in your garage for the next 10 years, which can be its own kind of emotional burden to deal with later.
Now, I want to move to what I think is the most profound part of this deep dive. Section 6, the hidden purpose. We've talked about fonts and paperweights, but let's talk about the heart of it. The source calls it reducing emotional labor.
This is a concept from sociology that fits perfectly here. Emotional labor is the effort it takes to manage your own emotions and the emotions of others.
And when you are grieving, your tank is already empty.
Completely empty. You are running on fumes. Now, imagine you don't have a flyer. Every time you run into a neighbor, every time a distant cousin calls, you have to have the exact same conversation. When is the service? Where is it? What time?
And every single time you say those details, you are reliving the reality of the death.
Exactly. It is exhausting. It forces you to perform normalcy over and over again. The flyer is an efficiency tool that conserves your energy for grief. It does the talking for you. You can just text the image. You can point to the bulletin board. You can say, here are the details, and hand them the paper.
It's a shield.
It is a shield. It allows the family to step back and not have to be the town crier. It handles the business of the funeral so the family can focus on the feeling of the funeral.
And it also connects the community in a way that's unique. The source talks about reaching the outer circle.
Yes. The inner circle, the kids, the siblings, they already know the details. They were there when the decisions were made. The flyer isn't for them. The flyer is for the coworkers. The guy who worked with your dad 10 years ago. The lady who sat behind your mom in the pew every Sunday.
The people who want to pay their respects but don't want to intrude.
Exactly. They aren't in the family group chat. If there is no public flyer, they might not know the service is happening until it's already over. And that leads to a lot of regret. I would have gone if I had known. The flyer ensures those people have the opportunity to actually show up.
It extends the invitation.
It creates a gathering. And for the family, seeing those people show up, seeing the church full of people from different parts of their loved one's life is incredibly healing. The flyer makes that gathering possible. It casts the net wide.
There is also the emotional weight of the object itself.
This is the part that really stays with me. Even though it is a functional piece of paper, it is not devoid of emotion.
How so?
Seeing the loved one's name in print, seeing their photo formatted with dates, it is an explicit acknowledgement of the significance of their life. It makes it real.
It signals that the passing is worthy of notice.
Yes. It says this person lived, they died, and it matters enough that we are stopping to tell you about it. Even in its simplicity, the flyer is a profound act of respect. It turns a private loss into a public memory.
It's validating.
It is, and for many people, holding that physical flyer at the service or taking it home, it's a real connection. It's a small, tangible piece of the person they lost. You see people pinning them to their fridge or tucking them into a Bible. It becomes a relic.
It's amazing how we started this conversation talking about 8.5 by 11 paper and font sizes, and we ended up talking about validation and the deep nature of grief.
That's the power of these rituals, isn't it? Even the administrative parts have deep emotional roots.
Let's synthesize this as we wrap up. What is the big takeaway here for everyone listening?
The takeaway is that the funeral flyer is a masterclass in functional design. It has to balance opposing forces, speed versus quality, clarity versus emotion, low cost versus high dignity.
And it acts as part of a larger system.
Right. It works alongside the brochure, the booklet, the obituary. The flyer announces and invites. The brochure guides you through the service. The booklet preserves the story. You really need all of them to have a complete communication system.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on all this. We've talked about the physical flyer and the digital PDF, but think about what happens to these flyers decades from now.
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Right. In genealogy and historical research, these funeral flyers, these everyday functional objects, they actually become primary historical documents. They might be the only existing record of a person's community ties, or the specific church they attended, or who officiated.
They outlive their immediate transactional purpose.
Exactly. They become a permanent footprint in the historical record. So when you make one, or when you save one, you aren't just communicating with the present, you are leaving a breadcrumb for the future.
That is a beautiful way to think about it.
So the next time you are walking out of the grocery store, or into your place of worship, and you see one of these flyers pinned to a board,
Don't just look past it. Stop for a second.
notice it. Not just as a sad notice, but as a tool that is meeting a family exactly where they are.
Notice the design choices. Notice the clarity. And realize that that simple piece of paper is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting for a family that is going through the hardest days of their lives.
It fulfills its purpose quietly, sharing what needs to be known and honoring a life briefly but sincerely.
Whether it's a DIY job printed at home or a professionally designed card, it helps bring people together to say goodbye. And that is a vital function.
Well, this has certainly changed how I look at bulletin boards. Thank you for walking us through the hidden complexity of the funeral flyer today.
My pleasure. It is always worth looking closer at the things we take for granted.
Absolutely. And thank you to you, our listeners, for taking this deep dive with us. We will see you next time.